In the enveloping darkness just before dawn, the city of Paris seemed to hold its breath, cloaked in quiet anticipation and unspoken tension. Outside the walls of a secure yet foreboding prison, a somber procession was unfolding, soldiers moving with measured purpose, their figures cast in long, shifting shadows by flickering torchlight. At the heart of this grim tableau was a young nobleman, his wrists bound tightly, his face pale but composed, standing amidst soldiers who appeared more like enforcers than protectors. There was no noise of protest, no plea for mercy, only the heavy silence that descended over all, broken only by the distant, relentless toll of the early morning bell. It was a moment steeped in tragedy, and yet it was a moment that often escaped the scrutiny of history's brightest lights. Few knew that, on this day, the world would witness a death that would forever stain the legacy of one of Europe's most renowned military and political figures, Napoleon Bonaparte. Unlike revolutionary agitators or ardent monarchists, the Duke's allegiance was rooted in peace, not in revolutionary fervor or royalist rebellion. Yet, as the political winds shifted and Napoleon's fears intensified, even the most innocent seemed to fall under the suspicion of conspiracy. The events leading up to that fateful dawn reveal a sequence of whispers, clandestine meetings, and intelligence reports that painted a landscape of paranoia. Rumors swirled about secret plots to assassinate Napoleon and restore the Bourbon monarchy, plots allegedly orchestrated by a loose network of royalist sympathizers, Republican rebels, and foreign agents. Among these was a figure named George Gueudel, a fervent royalist fanatic whose reputation for orchestrating covert schemes made him a prime suspect in Napoleon's eyes. At the same time, other voices within the government's intelligence apparatus whispered concerns about possible uprisings, pushing the emperor further into suspicion. The nation, battered and transformed by years of revolt, war, and upheaval, was attempting to find a fragile balance between revolutionary ideals and monarchical restoration. This period, roughly spanning 1814 to 1815, marked a pivotal juncture in European history, and understanding the climate of France during this time is key to comprehending the tragic events that would unfold later. Following the fall of Napoleon Bonaparte's empire in 1814, France entered a phase of political uncertainty. This 100 Days episode in 1815, when Napoleon escaped exile in Elba to reclaim his throne briefly, only deepened the chaos. Paris, the heart of revolutionary change and imperial might, was a city of contrasts. Revolutionary ruins, palaces, statues, and public spaces scarred by years of conflict were transformed into a backdrop of a fragile peace. This uneasy alliance among monarchies aimed to contain France's revolutionary legacy, fearing the spread of republican ideals across the continent. Diplomatic negotiations and inter-European conflicts raged against this backdrop of political tension, all while inside France, factions vied for influence and control. Amidst this intense climate, the very fabric of French society was marked by contradictions. Intelligence agencies, led by figures like Joseph Fouché, Napoleon's cunning and pragmatic minister of police, focused intensely on rooting out what they perceived as threats. Ironically, this climate of paranoia often led to acts of injustice, as accusations could be made without evidence, and innocent individuals found themselves ensnared in political machinations. Throughout this volatile landscape, the idea of loyalty was scrutinized under the microscope of survival. For many ordinary citizens and nobles alike, loyalty to the crown, to revolutionary ideals, or to Napoleon himself was tested daily. The atmosphere was ripe for tragedy, as fear often overshadowed reason, and justice sometimes gave way to the exigencies of political expediency. In essence, France in 1814 to 1815 was a nation in transition, haunted by its history yet eager to forge a new identity. Among the numerous figures operating behind the scenes, George Gueudel emerges as a key but shadowy character. A staunch royalist fanatic, Gueudel epitomized the relentless opposition to Napoleon's rule. A fervent monarchist, he believed that the true destiny of France lay in restoring the Bourbon monarchy, an ideal he pursued through clandestine networks and conspiratorial plots. His history was one of steadfast opposition. His activism, often covert, was driven by a conviction that Napoleon's tyranny had led France into chaos and that only a return to monarchy could restore order. Gueudel's role in the conspiracy to kill Napoleon was pivotal. Though details remain fragmentary, his orchestration of clandestine meetings, recruitment of sympathizers, and dissemination of propaganda made him a dangerous adversary. His ultimate goal was not merely political destabilization, but the complete overthrow of Napoleon's regime and the reinstatement of the traditional aristocratic order. Finally, Joseph Fouché, one of the most infamous and calculating political figures of the Napoleonic era, plays a significant role behind the scenes. As France's Minister of Police, Fouché was adept at espionage, intrigue, and political maneuvering. His reputation for ruthlessness and cold calculation stemmed from a lifetime of navigating the treacherous waters of revolutionary and imperial politics. Each new piece of intelligence, whether verified or fabricated, seemed to justify harsher measures. Among the key figures responsible for maintaining oversight was Joseph Fouché, Napoleon's unscrupulous Minister of Police. Fouché's role was complex. While officially tasked with protecting the regime, he was known for his Machiavellian manipulations, often playing multiple sides in the political spectrum to serve his own ambition. In this tense atmosphere, the alliance of fear and suspicion led to a series of draconian measures. The arrest of suspected revolutionary sympathizers became a routine response to any report or rumor, often without concrete evidence. In some cases, innocent citizens, noblemen, merchants, even common soldiers, were detained and questioned harshly, their loyalty and intentions questioned. The fact that he had been in contact with other exiled nobles and was seen as sympathetic to reconciliation as opposed to revolutionary or royalist extremism did little to protect him. Instead, he was viewed by some as a potential fifth column, a lurking threat who might, at any moment, turn against the revolutionaries and the new regime. The conspiracy theories about him gained momentum through the relentless reports of spies and informants. Ultimately, the story of the conspiracy and paranoia that enveloped France during this volatile period illustrates a profound lesson about leadership and trust. The cycle of suspicion bred misunderstanding, injustice, and tragedy, serving as a dark mirror to the dangers of unchecked power and fear-driven decision-making. On the night of March 15, 1814, the air was thick with tension and the cold morning fog cloaked the quiet town of Ettenheim in an ominous shroud. His convictions aligned with peace, not rebellion. Yet in this unstable climate, where paranoia brewed amidst the shifting alliances and rivalries of Europe, any aristocrat with royalist sympathies or connections to the ancient regime could be deemed a threat. The very fact that he had remained in exile, residing quietly in a foreign land, now seemed reason enough for suspicion. As the soldiers took their positions, he held his head high, embodying a dignity that would outlive the brutality of the act itself. The volley of shots echoed through the night, silencing any lingering questions. The young man's body slumped against the cobblestones, the silent testimony of a miscarriage of justice. The incident heightened tensions and contributed to the ferment that would eventually lead to the Sixth Coalition's renewed efforts to defeat Napoleon. It underscored a key irony, that in trying to quash perceived threats through ruthless means, Napoleon reinforced the narratives of his enemies, painting himself as a tyrant whose actions alienated even his allies. The moral outrage extended beyond diplomatic circles into the realm of historical reflection. Many contemporaries and subsequent historians would describe the young nobleman's death as worse than a crime, an example of the dangerous consequences of leadership driven by paranoia. This phrase, often attributed to historical critics of Napoleon, encapsulated the idea that acts carried out in fear and suspicion could have repercussions far more damaging than any military defeat or political betrayal. Rather than consolidating power through strength and legitimacy, Napoleon's resort to extrajudicial killing, committed in haste and secrecy, chipped away at his moral authority and leadership legitimacy. Long-term, the event became a symbol of the perils inherent in absolute power unchecked by justice. The young nobleman, who had been a man of moderate views and exile, became a martyr, his brutal death inspiring opposition and sympathy across social and political boundaries. Secret memorials and underground memorials grew in the shadows, commemorating his sacrifice and condemning the cruelty of the regime that ordered his execution. The memory of his death persisted in the collective consciousness as a stark warning that tyranny often breeds resentment and rebellion. In the region's cultural landscape, the event influenced artworks, literature, and political discourse. Writers and politicians used the nobleman's death as an allegory for the dangers of authoritarian rule, emphasizing that the true test of a nation's strength lies in its capacity for justice and mercy. As time passed, the story of the young nobleman's death served as a universal truth, that the heavy hand of power, when wielded without compassion or fairness, sows the seeds of its own downfall. Despite the immediate silence imposed by the regime, the long-term historical impact was undeniable. The event cast a shadow over Napoleon's legacy, with critics and opponents arguing that such acts of cruelty revealed the true nature of his rule. In subsequent narratives, the execution was often portrayed as a tragic mistake, a misstep that undermined the very authority Napoleon sought to strengthen. Historians would point out that it was acts like this that alienated potential allies and hardened the resolve of his enemies, ultimately contributing to his downfall. Even in the present day, the event remains a powerful reminder of the importance of justice and the dangers of fear-driven leadership. Memorials dedicated to the nobleman serve as monuments not just to his memory, but to the enduring principles of fairness and human dignity. The story evokes ongoing debates about the moral responsibilities of rulers and the necessity of safeguarding justice in times of crisis. In sum, the reactions and consequences of the young nobleman's death etched a lasting legacy intertwined with the rise and fall of Napoleon's empire. It exemplified how acts of brutality, even when aimed at perceived enemies, can lead to unintended repercussions, fueling opposition and weakening legitimacy. Throughout history, the stories of leaders and their actions often serve as mirrors reflecting the complex relationship between power, justice, and legacy. The tragic case of the young nobleman, shot without evidence on Napoleon's orders, is a stark reminder that the wielding of absolute authority can blur the lines between justice and tyranny. As we examine this dark chapter, it compels us to consider how power, when unchecked by moral restraint and legal due process, can lead to irreversible harm not only for individuals but also for the societies that permit such abuses. Power, by its very nature, creates a tendency towards centralization and often breeds paranoia. Leaders who accumulate immense authority may become convinced that their survival depends on preemptive actions, sometimes fueled by fear rather than factual threats. Napoleon, a military genius who rose from obscurity to empire, was no stranger to this dynamic. His campaigns, reforms, and consolidation of authority earned him admiration, yet also fostered suspicion among his enemies and even within his own ranks. The tragic incident of the nobleman's execution exemplifies the perilous consequences when paranoia overrides justice. Without concrete evidence, executing an innocent person not only destroys a life, but also erodes the moral foundation upon which the state must stand. Justice, ideally, is grounded in fairness, evidence, and due process. The swift execution of the nobleman, lacking any form of trial or substantive proof, stands as a chilling testament to the perils of substituting justice with expedients driven by fear. When political or personal rivals wield power to eliminate perceived threats without accountability, it fosters a culture of impunity and arbitrary authority. This erosion of justice can, over time, undermine the very legitimacy of those in power. In the case of Napoleon, this act of brutality tarnished his reputation, portraying a ruler who resorted to ruthless measures to maintain control, even if it meant sacrificing innocent lives. Such actions resonate beyond their immediate context, serving as cautionary tales about the importance of justice as a societal pillar that safeguards human rights and dignity. Legacy, the enduring impact that historical figures leave behind, is often shaped by both their achievements and their moral conduct. While Napoleon's military victories and administrative reforms transformed Europe, episodes like the killing of the nobleman cast long shadows over his legacy. Acts of cruelty, especially those carried out without justice, risk overshadowing accomplishments, emphasizing the darker aspects of a ruler's character. For many, this event exemplifies the ultimate cost of authoritarian leadership, the moral degradation that accompanies tyranny. When leaders prioritize power over humanity, they risk becoming masters of injustice rather than agents of progress. Reflecting on this incident prompts us to ask, what responsibilities come with authority? Leaders are entrusted with the welfare of their people and must uphold principles of justice and humanity. Power, when wielded with empathy and a commitment to fairness, can inspire collective progress and stability. Conversely, When used to satisfy fears or suppress dissent, it leads to the spiral of cruelty and repression. The nobleman's tragic fate highlights the importance of moral integrity and due process, a lesson still relevant today in evaluating how governments and leaders treat those they govern. Moreover, this story asks us to consider how history remembers its figures. Napoleon, often celebrated as a visionary leader and military genius, also bears the stain of decisions driven by suspicion and brutality. This duality underscores that legacy is not solely about achievements, but also about the moral choices made along the way. True leadership entails balancing strength with compassion, authority with justice. It is the humanity shown in times of crisis that most defines a leader's true legacy. Ultimately, the massacre of an innocent nobleman without evidence serves as a somber reminder that power, if not tempered by justice and moral restraint, can become a destructive force. It teaches us that true strength lies not in domination, but in moral integrity, fairness, and respect for human life. History's greatest lessons are often found in its darkest moments. They challenge us to build systems rooted in justice, to lead with empathy, and to uphold the dignity of every individual against the corrupting influence of unchecked power. In contemplating this tragic event, we are called to reflect on the values that define a just society, values that must be guarded vigilantly to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. Power, when leveraged with conscience and a commitment to justice, can be a force for good. But when it bypasses these principles, it becomes a tool of cruelty that tarnishes legacies and leaves scars across generations. The tragic demise of the young nobleman, whose life was snatched away without the benefit of due process or concrete evidence, offers a sobering reflection on the perilous nature of unchecked power and the devastating consequences of paranoia turned into policy. His story encapsulates a universal lesson: that justice, when sacrificed at the altar of fear and political expediency, erodes the moral fabric of leadership and undermines the very virtues it seeks to uphold. Throughout history, instances abound where leaders, driven by suspicion and the desire to cement their authority, have resorted to actions that haunt their legacies long after the dust has settled. Napoleon's decision to swiftly execute an innocent man without tangible proof exemplifies how the obsession with perceived threats can distort justice into brutality. In this case, the young nobleman became an unwitting symbol of the destructive potential of tyranny, his fate sealed not by evidence, but by the prevailing climate of suspicion that coursed through Napoleon's regime. The tragedy is not merely in the loss of an innocent life, but also in the erosion of moral authority that such acts entail, tarnishing even the most celebrated leaders and militaries. This story underscores the imperative of the rule of law and due process. Justice must be rooted in facts and fairness, especially when the stakes involve human lives and national integrity. When the machinery of justice is manipulated by fear, it becomes a tool of oppression rather than a safeguard for the innocent. The young nobleman's execution, conducted in haste and without transparent legal proceedings, serves as a cautionary tale that preemptive action based on conjecture can spiral into irreversible atrocities. It reminds us that true strength does not lie in swift retribution or unchecked authority, but in the capacity to uphold justice impartially, even amidst chaos. Furthermore, the case prompts reflection on the importance of mercy and compassion in leadership. While strength may be measured in military might and strategic victories, true greatness is demonstrated through restraint, empathy, and the recognition of human fallibility. Napoleon, a man celebrated for his military genius, chose a brutal shortcut rather than pursuing a path of justice and reconciliation. The consequences of that choice extended beyond the immediate tragedy, fueling resentments and providing propaganda material that enemies would leverage in their anti-Napoleonic campaigns. This betrays a critical insight. Cruelty may offer fleeting control, but it ultimately damages the moral and political foundation of a ruler's authority. From a broader perspective, the execution's aftermath offers lessons on the corrosive effects of paranoia in governance. Leaders who allow fear to override rational judgment risk, creating an environment where suspicion breeds injustice and innocent lives are sacrificed in the name of security. The young nobleman's death exemplifies how paranoia can distort priorities, leading to acts that weaken social cohesion and trust in leadership. This is a warning relevant to any society regardless of era or regime type, highlighting the necessity of checks and balances and the vigilance required to prevent the descent into tyranny. In considering the personal dimension, the nobleman's quiet dignity in facing death, refusing a blindfold and confronting his end with composure, embodies the resilience of the human spirit amidst profound injustice. His silent protest against wrongful execution becomes a powerful symbol of integrity and moral courage. His story urges us to remember that even in the darkest moments, dignity and truth have the power to inspire future generations. It reminds us that moral standpoints, even when met with violence, can leave indelible marks on history and conscience. Moreover, this tragic episode prompts us to question the very nature of justice and the ethical responsibilities of those in power. It calls for humility and self-awareness among leaders, emphasizing that authority must serve as a mechanism for fairness, not as a means to eliminate perceived enemies. The lesson is clear: no amount of political gain justifies the abandonment of moral principles. True leadership requires balancing strength with wisdom, severity with mercy, and suspicion with prudence. Finally, the story of the nobleman's end resonates beyond its immediate historical context. It invites reflection on modern justice systems and political structures, reminding us that the lessons of the past remain relevant today. We are urged to prioritize human rights, due process, and the inherent dignity of every individual. As history repeatedly demonstrates, sacrificing these principles for expedience, whether in war, politics, or everyday life, inevitably leads to suffering, loss, and the erosion of moral authority. In essence, the nobleman's tragic fate exemplifies the devastating toll when power is wielded without justice and humanity. It compels us to remember that leadership should be rooted not in fear and brutality, but in the unwavering commitment to fairness and compassion. Only through such principles can societies hope to prevent history's darkest chapters from repeating themselves. His story, therefore, serves as a solemn warning, a call to uphold the dignity of justice over the shadows of paranoia, and as an enduring testament to the enduring importance of mercy, impartiality, and the moral responsibility inherent in leadership.